Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about the topic that I enjoy talking about the most and that I prefer talking about. This is the topic I meditate on 24/7 all day every day. This is where my heart and mind are really at. So beyond all of the other content I produce, beyond all of the other things I say, this video is going to contain the most key aspects of my inner heart and mind and where I'm coming from in why I do what I do, why I say what I say, etc., why I have the views I do. So we're going to talk about the distinction between actual paradise reality and the outer impositional realities, plural. We're going to discuss the clear distinction between these two and how to immerse daily and nightly, both while awake, in dreaming, and hopefully in deep sleep, in this deepest paradise state that is custom and unique to you, unique to each individual. So let us dive right in, shall we? And as I'm talking about this, I'm actually going to be playing this video that's really good on YouTube here that I highly recommend all of you watch. I will contain the link to it in the description and you can check it out. It goes through in great detail all of the different traps that the Archons try to throw at you after you leave your body in this state, all of the different traps after you evade and dodge the first false light. There are many other traps they try to present you with, many of them quite alluring to just about every consciousness. So it's a very thorough, detailed breakthrough on how to overcome all of those traps. So I'm going to play this and let's go really deep into this topic. So first of all, what we need to understand and really immerse ourselves in is that your kind, loving, caring, driven, deepest desires are the real you. That is the real you from the eternal paradise state you are in consciousness and come from and must go back to, especially before you leave this external bodily state. So your deepest desires, your deepest ideals, the kind desires that you have, the loving, affectionate desires you have, the purely playful, childlike desires that you have. Those are the essence of the eternal paradise entity that you are. So it's very important to understand that this entire world we're surrounded by is all impositional physics, impositional science, impositional information, impositional facts. It's very useful to understand how the impositional world works and operates, but never ever under any circumstances assume that the impositional world is all there is only. That is a great error and a great mistake, but this world is designed to convince you of that, especially if you're a kind-hearted, loving person. This world is designed to get you to eventually cave and collapse, fall into lifelong, nightmarish, continual depression and anxiety, in order that you give up your combat against it, in order that you surrender to it and accept that imposition is all there is and all there ever will be, past, present, and future. Whether you believe in reincarnation or not, or accept it or not, either way, you should your entire life combat against the impositional reality versus accepting it. And the reason you should do that is because by combating impositional reality, you'll start to tap into and directly experience these alternate, deeper, other realities. Now, you'll notice that the entire world, both the secular world and the religious world, as well as the spiritual worlds, pretty much every viewpoint on the planet, almost all of them, are united in the idea that everything ultimately comes from one original source or singularity or pure consciousness, something that's an amalgamated oneness of some kind. And most people believe that good and bad branch off and are simply aspects of that original oneness, whatever it may be. Okay? Now, this idea is actually one of the darkest and deepest deceits that the entire world faces. So if you're like me, you've always had a hunch and a gut feeling and just an inherent, grasp that that's never been true. Obviously, pleasure and love and affection come from a different source from torture, torment, pain, anguish, etc. There is no way in hell or heaven or any version of reality that literally everything could be coming from the same singular source. Extreme pleasure and extreme pain are two different, they're two distinct, they're two diametrically opposed things. They're too far apart to ever have come from the same root source, whether it's a singularity or a single divine being or anything of the sort. There's no way things that are that diametrically opposed could ever come from the same central thing. So it's very important that you understand the evidence for this as well. If you look into the ever new discoveries within physics, they're actually ever more confirming this multiple source reality idea. Outside of just an idea, there's actually scientific evidence pointing to this that is extreme and large scale, okay? Including within the secular world. Also, within the world of mathematics, the dynamic between 0 and all the other numbers confirms that we're dealing with at least two separate sources of reality, one pleasurable, one torturous, one benevolent, one malevolent, etc. And in fact, what we're looking at is the way numbers work shows us how these separate source realities interact with each other. So we know that we're dealing with at least two separate sources of reality, if not many more, okay? We know that we're at least dealing with a source of all pleasures, all beauty, all wonder, all inspirational things that are soothing. We know one source has to do with those things, and we know that another source has to do with randomization of things, right? Everything from pain and torture to false pleasure, temporary pleasure, pleasure that does not last, that is not sustainable. So on the one side, this is what's very interesting. Those who claim that everything comes from one source, at least everything in this universe, on the one hand, as far as that one specific source that they're talking about, they're partially correct in the sense that everything that could possibly exist, in other words, all possibilities, right, all potentials, emanate from that one raw potential source. The problem with that, though, is that within that, you contain the potential of both maximal pleasure and maximal pain and torment. So therefore, that raw potential source is no good because, in fact, it's the worst evil of all. Because something that potentially can lead to both good or evil will eventually, for sure, also lead to all the worst tortures imaginable. So that's the inherent built-in problem to that one source. So it's not that that source is not at all the source of pleasures. The problem is it's the source of temporary, non-lasting pleasures. Pleasures that are not perpetual in nature. So you can think of in terms of those types of pleasures, crash and burn types of pleasures. For example, extreme hard drugs that cause an extreme crash afterwards and cause you to feel like shit. Those types of pleasures are coming from the raw potential source. That's the potential source of both pleasures and pains. However, the pleasure that is sustained, that is ongoing, that is continual, that is inside you, that permeates you, your consciousness, your thoughts, your feelings, beyond how you're feeling in body, brain, etc. That pleasure, that perpetual pleasure, that permeating pleasure, is from the pleasure entities. It is from the genuine paradise beings, the paradise source. So, hyperspecificity, okay? And what this means, therefore, is that all of the entities within the paradise reality, each one of them is their own unique separate source to a unique stream of perpetual pleasures. Okay? This is very key and very important to understand. So this is how we know for a fact that we are dealing with not only two sources of reality. If you want to jumble up all the paradise entities in the paradise state, from the paradise state as, all one thing, you can do that, but I feel it's more mature and more thorough to recognize and distinguish the various paradise entities for their unique contributions to the rest of reality. And in fact, you yourself individually are also your own source of reality, also distinct from these other sources of reality. You're interactive with them, okay? So if you look at reality like this, okay, there's a monad that is the source of all possibilities, right? And all those possibilities are the varieties we experience in this world and other worlds. Okay, plop, there's a state you're experiencing, whether for good or for bad. You like some aspects of it, you dislike some aspects of it. All these situations you're just put into that you don't specifically desire. Well, that's simply because you are interacting with and getting caught up in the randomized possibilities of reality, which emanate from raw possibility itself, raw potential itself directly. So most of the world worships that raw potential, and that's exactly the problem. That's exactly what continues on these fucked up world cycles that we face and experience, because most people, without realizing it, are worshiping and glorifying and praising that raw potential, that raw possibility, including most of the secular world that doesn't accept any gods or entities or anything like this as necessarily real, or at least none of them worthy of worship. Even most of the secular world praises the impositional reality of physics, of science, etc., of all these types of things, right? So they're caught up in the quagmire of that also. It's really only the Gnostics, specific individuals among the Hare Krishnas, and stray individuals with their own individual practices scattered throughout the world that actually have a distinct view and practice outside of some variation of glorifying or praising the singularity or the oneness or the raw possibility, the raw potential source. Okay? So that raw potential source is over there in one corner, you could say. You yourself, as the source of your own experiences of reality, you being one of the sources of reality, are in your own corner, you could say. Obviously, you're not literally in a corner. We're just using this so you can kind of do a rough visual with the limited brain here. And then, the pleasure goddess, the pleasure god, the entities of concentrated gushing pleasure only. That's all they gush for all the rest of eternity in their own unique ways. They are their own sources of reality, okay? Distinct from you and distinct from the other source, which is the monad, the source of all the possibilities. Now, the distinction between you and the pleasure goddess and pleasure god, or the pleasure entities, if you're not a fan of the term god or goddess, etc., take your pick. Pleasure entities and you, right? The distinction between them and you, distinguished from the monad, is that the pleasure entities and you have the common feature that your emanations, your world that you dwell in eternally, your paradise state, is an eternal, hyper-specific, exact detail world. It's a hyper-specific, exact detail reality. In other words, you are an eternal, hyper-specific, hyper-particular, formful entity that is full of gushing personality and uniqueness, okay? Now, your distinction is that specificity, that hyper-specificity, that hyper-uniqueness that is unique to you only out of all other beings, okay? So every one of you watching this video, you have a hyper, forever, eternal, unique form, personality, specific set of eternal playtimes that you engage in your unique paradise state, okay? The pleasure entities, who are concentrated pleasure directly, the pleasure goddess or pleasure god, if you are okay or want to refer to them as goddess or god, or simply as the pleasure entities, they are the entities gushing pleasure specifically, directly, pleasure itself out from them. So the idea is you interact with them in a team way, distinct from the monad, and therefore the monad is something you never have to engage with or interact with or get sucked into, because the monad is the thing that emanates possibilities. Possibilities are bad. You don't want possibilities mixed in with your existence or your experience. If you ever allow anything other than the hyper-specific details of your eternal ideal meditations, if you allow anything else into your thoughts, into your meditations, into your ideal, then what happens is you end up in a world or an experience other than your eternal, forever hyper-specifics that are unique to you. Do you understand now? So, possibility is antagonistic to specificity. This is why it's very important to understand. And now you can see the full darkness here. It's what I call the demiurge monadic conundrum, or the demiurge monad cycle, the demiurge monad continuum. Take your pick, however you want to refer to it as. So in other words, A mistake a lot of people make and a mistake a lot of Gnostics make is this idea that once you get back to the monad, right, you get to the pleroma and to the monad, that, oh, now you've gotten back to your eternal origin perfected state. The problem is the monad is actually the thing that will suck you back into a world of a demiurge eventually, if not immediately. Okay? The reason being is, if you glorify and relish and praise and find a love for possibility instead of hyperspecificity, then you immediately get sucked into what? You get sucked into possibilities being imposed on you. So a good life, a bad life, a mixed life, basically anything other than your eternal central obsessive desire will get imposed on you, for better or for worse, in the sense of, you might have a better life or a worse life. When I say that, those impositions, none of them will be better than your actual eternal deepest desire. No, it just means you may end up with a better randomization of life versus a worse randomization, right? So think about it. There's so many things that are thrown at you in life that are not within your desire, right? Those are things outside of your specificity. But things that are within your specificity, within your meditations, within your desire, are pleasurable to you, obviously, right? Even if they're impositionally thrown at you. Even if it's the impositional version, right? Because those things are closer to your hyperspecificity. So this concept is not too hard to understand, but it can be very challenging, and you have to have a very combative nature to actually apply this in your daily life, how you process reality, how you process everything else. Because everything in the world is always trying to suck you back into some variation of appreciation for the raw possibility, including this idea of relishing and glorifying the nothingness or the void or the so-called non-existence or whatever. All of those are lies. There is no such thing as you not existing. That's a completely false idea. There are only hyperspecificities and possibilities that are experienced. That's all. So either you get back to your eternal hyperspecificity or you remain forever in some version of imposed reality. Take your pick. Okay? I'm interested in immersing in my exact specifics, formfully, in great detail, not anything else. So never accept any teaching or ideology that tries to get you to go into a raw possibility state, a state of raw, pure consciousness, concentrated consciousness, because all of those things have one thing in common. They're vague. They're non-specific in nature. Now, this word, the pleroma, this is very interesting. It's very interesting how this term is so similar to the term play roam, playing and roaming, right? The pleroma is what I refer to that as. So, if instead of going to the monad of raw possibility, you focus on being in the pleroma, the world where you can eternally play and roam in your hyperspecific ideals, you're going to be much better off if you focus on your paradise nature in the pleroma. Okay? So the pleroma distinguished from the pleroma that emanates from the monad, naturally. So all of these pictures and images that are flashing before you right now, they're examples of different specificities, different forms, faces, personalities, etc. So go deep into your meditations and recognize the eternal form you mainly prefer to experience having forever. Okay? Meditate on all the details of exactly what you want to experience over and over, repeatedly, continually, for the rest of eternity. Now, if you actually desire the thing to a maximum, you're going to want to experience it repeatedly, continually, right? Of course, you have the ability to mix up your playtimes, to add variety to those things, but you always have to be specific. So this is what's very important about meditations. The reason mantras are always very specific words, specific combinations of sound. Images that you focus on are always specific stationary forms. It's because those are tools to help you focus on hyperspecificity, exactness, precise details. Precise details are the distinguishing feature of paradise states. The reason the world is so miserable now, or I should say the people in the world are so miserable, everybody's constantly bombarded with a continual barrage of different images, different sounds, different forms. So everybody is constantly distracted from their central main eternal forms that they meditate on constantly, forever. And they also develop an ever-increasing lack of appreciation for specific varieties of forms. Thus, that leads people back into what? The demiurge monadic continuum, once again. So that everybody then focuses, oh, we got to escape the demiurge reality. We got to escape the impositions. Well, then what happens? They escape that, and then guess what? They end up going into the monad, and they get cast right back into another demiurgic world again. Why? Because they focused on the vague, the non-specific, and they worshipped and glorified and meditated on the non-specific. They blanked their mind out when they meditated. So guess what? Well, their destination is going to be the non-specific. What does that mean? The non-specific will lead you to another non-specific, like this world again, for example. Not a fun outcome at all, actually. So yes, there are fake false paradise states where you can dwell with a hierarchical being, where you can worship a being that you meditated on or praised, etc. But those are false temporary paradise states. They will not last eternally, because eventually you'll recognize, wait a minute, I have specifics outside of this particular being's domain. And so therefore you will actually eventually leave that being's worshipful paradise state, most likely be cast into a state like this again for a while, and then have to overcome that being and the demiurge and the monad to get back to your eternal play Roma state. Now, if you have any questions on this so far, feel free to shoot me an email if you're confused or it's not quite clear yet. Now we're going to talk about the principle of permeating certainty distinguished from belief. Okay? Permeating certainty means you are certain of who you eternally are, your exact formful details, your exact eternal playtimes, and it's very clear to you. You don't believe it, you know it for a certainty. In fact, the permeating certainty is defined as that which you are so certain of and are directly experiencing so vividly that even if you receive impositional world evidence to the contrary, you still have the absolute, total, complete certainty that you are that eternal paradise being according to those exact details. So not even temporal evidence of any variety here can sway that certainty. That's the distinction between a belief. You don't need to believe a permeating certainty. You don't. It's not a wishful thought. It's not your imagination. It's not, ooh, wouldn't it be nice? No, you are certain of who you are forever, continually. My whole life, I've had this certainty nonstop, ever since I was a young kid. And the meditations have simply ever refined over time. I've ever refined my meditations on who I eternally am, my formful details of my personality, etc. If you're interested in those details and wanting to know more, feel free to email me about that, and I'm happy to talk with you about those details. You may find that we're eternal paradise relatives, friends, with your unique paradise, crossing over mine, where we hang out and have a good time with each other, etc. Because the idea is these paradise states, we're not hyper-isolated from each other unless we want to be. But it's a very good idea to work as eternal team members. So we each have our own unique paradise states that are unique to us. But the idea is we want to work as much as a team to encourage each other in those unique paradise states, right? While we are experiencing them. Another flaw, another common mistake in the modern world especially, is people go into this hyper excessive, unnecessarily over the top, individualistic mindset towards their meditations on their paradise state. So yes, you should meditate on your unique paradise state that is unique to you, but not at the exclusion of appreciating and being aware of others' paradise states also at the same time. Do you see? Especially those that are close to you, close friends, close relatives, lovers, romantic partners, etc. Because the idea is we're helping each other in the paradise states as a team. We're not so isolated to where, okay, we're just only experiencing a paradise state and nobody else ever. It's just us in our own la-la land forever. No, none of the paradise states are la-la lands, obviously. Even though, yes, you can dance around and say la-la if you want to. You get my point. They're much more significant than that in weight and in value. So basically all of the experiences you run into here on this side of things, they're twisted, distorted perversions of your eternal paradise state. So you can actually find and pick up on all the samples that you need to in this world to pick up on, hey, what is this experience the distorted reflection of? Oh, that's interesting. And you can actually start to piece stuff together to find out who you actually are by recognizing what spills over from your eternal paradise state into this particular world. Okay? So there's wide scale, very common to all of us, twisted, perverted, distorted spillovers. And there's hyper unique to us individually, distorted spillovers as well. So all of the negative, bad, horrible things you've experienced, recognize what exactly happened in those particular cases. And remember, horrible experiences are imposed on beings here because the raw potential reality, being unbelievably, unimaginably evil due to it containing all possibilities, basically will be bombarding you with everything that is the opposite of who you eternally are and your greatest sources of joy. So you will be experiencing samples of your sources of joy in spite of what's bombarded at you, not because of it. Okay? So let's talk also the distinction between impositional pleasure, impositional outer good life, and internal perpetuated pleasure. Okay, the distinction is, for example, take someone who's born really wealthy, rich. They have an easy life. They don't barely ever get sick. They're good looking, tall. They have a big cock. Tons of women want to have sex with them all the time. In other words, they just live a life of total luxury, like male or female. The female version, a perfect curvy body, the ideal female form, beauty, luxury life, everything goes smooth, very few issues, right? And then eventually they die, right? These individuals that experience a life like that, they're experiencing an outer impositional, distorted, twisted version of paradise. The problem is that very few of those individuals make the distinction between perpetuated, real, eternal, ideal pleasure from outer impositional pleasure. So it's very unlikely that those individuals will make it past the demiurge monad matrix, the demiurge monad continuum, etc. They'll probably get sucked right back into a very shitty situation after the good situation, because they were simply experiencing the outer impositional version of a paradise state. Okay? Now, those people who experience a mixed life or a life with a lot of torment and horrible problems here, it's much easier if you align your consciousness in the right way. It in many cases is much easier to recognize and distinguish outer impositional pleasures and joys from inner eternal perpetual paradise reality. Okay? So on one sense, it makes it easier for you to actually oppose false pleasures and, or if you experience them, to experience them with the consciousness, this is only a sample of the deeper pleasures of paradise, and not get distracted in a misplaced way by the outer pleasures. Because a lot of times those who have impositional pleasures just flooding their life, they tend to become dependent on those. So as soon as those pleasures get pulled away, they're like, oh my God, what the fuck do I do? And their life becomes this living hell, because they base their happiness on outer bodily things being imposed on them, right? Spoon-fed to them. Their pleasure was never from the inside. So, they get the money taken away, or the girlfriend goes away, or people stop liking them, or they get in an accident and their face gets all twisted and warped, right? So nobody dates them anymore. And then their life is over, and then they get suicidal, right? That's because they never had any internal paradise drive in them to speak of. That's why they were affected by the impositional pleasures being taken away. Because eternal pleasures, they never can be taken away from you, because they're what you desire. So if what you desire and idealize is recognized as the factual deeper reality, it literally does not matter externally what's thrown at you. You'll recognize everything that's thrown at you, good or bad, to be thrown at you from the monad and the demiurge, from the external matrix systems, plural. Okay? Whether good or bad, whether pleasurable or miserable, you'll recognize them as the temporary impositions that they are, because they're not your hyper-specifics. Okay? Even if they feel good, even if they're more or less pleasant. All right? So, with that said, I encourage you to go very deep into these meditations and these contemplations, and I will see you in the next video. Happy meditation, happy pleasuring, and joyful insight every step of the way. Perpetual Pleasurist signing out and plunging in to the deepest desires and contemplations and feelings I can possibly muster. And I hope you join me in this wondrous, amazing journey in the eternal play, Roma. Talk to you later.